Today, I'm joined by Alexander. He is a graduate student in behavioral and cognitive neuroscience, and he blogs at datepsychology.com and in other outlets like Aporia magazine. Welcome, Alexander.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here. Talk to you.
Yeah, I'm very glad to have you on. Like I mentioned in our little preamble before we started recording, you've showed up on a certain scene at one point, and you pissed off a lot of people because essentially your shtick, what you're doing is that you do a literature review on findings in behavioral psychology, sex research, cognitive neuroscience, things that obviously are tied into your PhD research, and your conclusions are not often tolerated by certain subsections of the internet who have their own canon, they have their own ideas about how things work. Some you're not. I don't think you're out to debunk anything, but I think you're probably out to just say, okay, this is what we actually know from research that's been published. This is how robust this research is. I mean, it's been interesting to follow you, and I've also had quite a few revelations from your a lot of ideas that I thought were common knowledge and might be a little bit shakier than I realized. So maybe let's start with kind of a few of these sacred cows. Dating apps. This has been an important cornerstone of the discourse in relations between the sexes. I definitely think dating apps have been disruptive of a lot of maybe maybe they weren't equilibria, but they were just things that people used to do to find a mate. Um, I mean, it does seem like a lot of people have moved towards online dating, and it has its own dynamics, obviously, which are not the dynamics of encounters of real humans face to face on the street with friends and all the typical spaces that people used to meet each other. So I wonder what your research kind of has revealed in this particular space. Like what are dating apps actually doing in maybe a proven way or maybe a researched way to the way that men and women interact?
Well, certainly dating apps are something new that has never existed in human history, that kind of environment where you are presented with a pool of potential mates that may be thousands and thousands of people. Certainly in our evolutionary history, maybe we were restricted to the people in our immediate environment. Mostly, even now, people pair up monogamously, so that takes people out of the dating pool. So it's certainly a very, very different environment. I believe the University of Chicago has a survey they keep updating and adding data to. It's called How Couples Meet and Stay Together. I think it's the University of Chicago, but that's the name of the data project in any case. And they find now that a majority of couples meet online. Maybe not all on dating apps, but online. So certainly there is also the social media effect, right? People, they slide into the DMs on Instagram, on Twitter, whatever the case may be. So that's another way that people still have access to this really, really wide pool of dating. So they found that it's a majority, but it's about, I say majority, or I should say the largest way that people meet now. It's about 40% as opposed to, and then so the other, the collection of other ways that people meet at work, through friends, at school, those would make up the other 60%. So that gives kind of a landscape or an idea, an initial starting point as to how important dating apps now are for mate selection. Also, I recently just put up a study on, well, I say a study, a survey. It's nothing peer reviewed. It's something I ran and did analysis on. But I just put this up, and about 70 to 80% of participants have tried a dating app at one time, but not so many are currently active on a dating app. So that's another thing, is that at any given moment, not most people won't be active on an app, but a lot of people, perhaps a super majority of individuals, have at some point been on an app in the past. So certainly they feature very, very highly uh, in our mating landscape, so to speak. And then on top of that, we do have the well observed phenomenon that women get many, many more matches on apps. And I think that is a central part of the common discourse on dating apps, is this huge sex disparity in matches, right? And what we have as far as data actually from apps on matches it doesn't tell you much more than just matches. Who's matching with who, who's getting more matches, and that sort of thing. A lot of people try to extrapolate from that to sexual behavior, to relationships, but it really doesn't tell us that much about it. And I think that's one area where people go astray, is because when we look at research on dating apps, we see that most people are actually using to find relationships. We tend to think of them as hookup apps, right? Like most people are using them for casual sex. At least that's an opinion many people have. But about a third of men, and a little bit less as far as women go, about 10%, report using the apps to find casual sex. Of course, that's related to something else, is that there's a big sex difference, one of the largest, most well replicated ones in evolutionary psychology, between men and women in sociosexuality, which represents a willingness to have casual sex. So this may be kind of what tempers, as far as dating apps are concerned, the fact that women get a lot of matches. But when we look at research on app users and we ask how many people have you had sex with, how many casual sex partners, we tend to see a ratio that's much closer 1 to 1. And of course, that surprises many people, because certainly that fact that women get many, many more matches has kind of filtered into the popular discourse. And a lot of people assume from that, okay, well, that of course that means that women are going to be having sex with a lot of people and that men aren't. And then on top of that, of course, there is also the fact that uh, sex ratios on apps are highly skewed, right? At any given moment, there's more men on apps. I found about 50% more men in the recent survey, but past, and the apps don't release good data on this, I think, because probably they don't want you to know that it's a lot of men, so they don't like to release it. But there's different studies, different sources, and they've ranged from similar, about 50% more men, to as high as 8 times as many men on apps. So even, even if there weren't kind of that match disparity, even if everyone was just matching up 1-1, not every man is going to find a match on apps. So certainly there's a lot of things in that whole picture that uh, make people angry.
Yes, one of the major things that make people angry is a famous graph that I remember you referred to as well. There's men finding women attractive, like by the, I guess, percentiles of attractiveness, pretty much on a normal distribution, and women rating, the top, I don't know, 20% of men as being attractive, and everything kind of falls off after that point, and that's kind of taken to mean that women have unrealistic standards, and I've always wondered what, because I do think, obviously, because there are so many men on these apps, and because men typically swipe right more, in the sense that they will go for more women in general, that women, because they get a lot of matches, would probably tend to go for better looking or more successful, or higher status men on these apps, just because they will match with them. Because I think, if a woman tries to swipe right on 100 guys and she only gets, I don't know, one match, then I guess she kind of quickly realizes, okay, this is my level, and this is my, I don't know, my looks match or whatever. But if essentially she gets, 50% of them are a match, then she'll probably message the better looking 5 or 10 or whatever guys from this pool, and they will probably tend to be in that top 20%, which might go out with her as well. So I think there's I don't know. There's a lot of expectation that women kind of instinctively know what their league is, but I feel like a lot of people measure their level in the so-called sexual marketplace by essentially what they can get. In the sense that, okay, will this person have a conversation with me? Will they want to go out on a date with me? I don't really know if people have a more keen sense of this, except for the responses that they get from whatever interaction they have.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, that's a big part of the discussion. Are the very high match rates for women essentially raising women's standards for men, especially as far as physical attractiveness is concerned, right? Because they may match with many men who are attractive and who may be more attractive than them, are they raising their standards and not settling for men of their own level of attractiveness? That's a difficult question to answer. I don't think it has been addressed very well in the research. Um, One thing that has been done is we know that the effect of viewing photos leads to higher selectivity. And there has been research on dating apps to that extent, experimental research, where women will swipe more on the first photos that they see. A woman who's never used an app, you put her on the app, she's going to swipe more on the photos. And the more photos she sees, the less she's going to swipe. So there is an effect of seeing more faces, just seeing more faces out of the beginning, that makes you more selective, that's already independent of the match rates. So just being exposed to that larger pool of men, even if you don't know how many matches you might get, is going to have that effect of making women, and it happens for men too, but not to the same extent. It happens more for women as well. So that's something to consider. Men also, as you mentioned, have, well observed, a serial swiping strategy where men will often go on the apps and swipe on everything. So a recent this was a paper, they didn't do any analysis, but they uploaded all of, I just put this on Twitter like 2 days ago. They uploaded all of their data to the open science framework. So I took the data off of there and I ran it. And women got a lot more matches, but even half of those matches didn't even receive a first message. So you can get a lot of matches, and even a lot of those can be kind of like chaff, so to speak. But even if you just compared the messages, women still got many, many more first messages than men, which is, of course, another element of the dynamic, right? Is that women don't send the first message, men send the first message. So certainly you have that courting behavior that is kind of a part of our traditions or Western traditions and evolutionary history, that the man pursues the woman. And on dating apps, that competition, that pursuit becomes much, much more fierce.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, and I think the broader conversation on dating apps is even more interesting just because it's become so much of a default. 'Cause I remember you referenced another study that said that I think it was, half of single men report not approaching women out of fear of being seen as creepy. I feel like this is, in fact, this definitely intensified since the dawn of dating apps because um, if this is the default way of meeting people, the people who are not successful in the dating apps or, people who will end up doing, I don't know, cold approach on the street or, talking to women and different situations. There's something they've got maybe nefarious intentions, and this whole thing is a bit, yeah, it just kind of magnifies this already, I mean, inherently existing tension between men and women, just because of the power differential and the fact that men tend to have sometimes more like sexually explicit intentions towards women in strange ways, and women don't always want to be open to that. And if you address some woman in like a parking lot when she's alone and stuff like that, that's already kind of a psychologically tense situation for a woman. And yeah, I think the apps kind of took that away for some women, and also kind of took the opportunity away for a lot of men.
Yeah, I agree. And that's also part of a broader trend I think that we're seeing, is that people are socializing much less in person now than there were. There are a few recent studies that looked at the size of friend groups now compared to the 90s. They asked, how many close friends do you have? In the 90s, women and men both reported, for women had more. It was about 15, and men at that point was about 10. And now men and women both are like, oh, I have like one or two close friends. It's really quite amazing in that sense. They asked about, when is the last time you've gone to a party in person, a house party? And it used to be, the average was like once a week in the 90s for men of the same age. These were men that were young men, about 18. And now it's like not even once a month. So a lot of people have shifted their socialization entirely to online. And so if you're getting rejected online and you're not socializing in person, then you can be very, very isolated. And certainly that isolation, if you and imagine you go on an app and you upload your best pictures and you swipe and no matches, right? Because about half of male profiles get no matches at all. And do we know that those are like good pictures that are getting like exactly zero matches or whatever? We don't know for sure. But a lot of male profiles get no matches. Imagine, if you're one of those individuals and you have tried to make a good profile, that could be extremely demoralizing.
Yeah, no, I think this is probably the crux of what is going wrong, and I feel that also is why a lot of these movements like kind of incel forums and black pill things like that have sprouted, and it's kind of like a support group. But the the only problem with that is that this is kind of a unique constellation technologically, and I don't think it's sustainable. I think it really, like many of the technology that we've been kind of slowly kind of infiltrated by in the last decade, they really do kind of push things to like a Pareto distribution where, the top people are doing better than ever, and the bottom people really are out of luck. because that's just kind of how the incentives in these systems work. When everyone's exposed to everyone, you know, the ranks will close pretty fast on what's at the top. But that's yeah, it's just it's unsustainable.
Yeah, definitely. So certainly, that's something that was seen in the OK Cupid matches, or message rates, I should say, and in Tinder data as well, is that you do kind of see that, the so-called, that is kind of, I think, where the 80-20 rule in the manosphere was derived from. They will point where, to data, and they'll say, well, look at the match rates on Tinder. And that's really what it reflects. It's kind of these match rates that you have a top 20% of men on the apps that are getting a lot of matches. That doesn't mean that the bottom 80% get none, but like I said, about half of them might get none. When it comes to actual like meetups and people that report having sex that are app users, then the ratio gets much, much more narrow. And I think that is kind of a silver lining, certainly because the match rates have been interpreted as meaning like, oh, this 80% of men is having sex with 60% of women, which the data definitely don't show. Certainly that's something that would be very pronounced in sexually transmitted disease statistics, but we've seen that male and female rates of STDs very close to one another, and if they go up or down a little bit by the year, okay, but they do in tandem. And so it's not, if it were most men excluded from the sexual marketplace, only a few men having a lot of sex, we would see, overall STD rates go down for men and up for women in that case, but not what we've seen. So probably what's happening is that when someone gets a lot of matches, imagine a man that swipes 100 times and he gets 50 matches, and another man swipes 100 times and he gets 10 matches. The first one has more women to choose from, but he may meet someone, he may meet them more easily, they might get into a relationship, and they may be taken off of the market. The first one might find it a little bit more difficult, but they also might end up in the same position, which is basically in a relationship with one person. And I think that's what people overestimate. I've called them in the past promiscuity narratives. People overestimate the extent to which individuals are having casual sex and being promiscuous versus the extent to which people are forming relationships, basically.
Yes, and I mean, just my experience in real life kind of showed me that. I mean, I met my husband on OkCupid, and definitely worked out for us, and we kind of took each other off the market fairly rapidly. But and the I would say probably half the marriages that I was privy to while I was in London were result of some form of on the apps, and people would take each other off the market. But at the same time, I also knew people who were kind of stuck in the loops, and people who either, didn't have much leverage or didn't think they have leverage, who were kind of jaded as well, both men and women, as on the thing. They were kind of, I don't know, very tired of the whole thing, but also couldn't let go of it because it seemed to be the only like the default way of meeting people. You could still go to bars, but if you're not like a social butterfly, it's going to be a bit harder to, just charm people into, I don't know, being your girlfriend or something like that. So, yeah, I think, for the people who it works for, it's great, but for I don't know, maybe not a majority, but a significant minority of people, it can be quite disheartening, and it does feels like it grinds you down. Especially, I mean, I obviously know more of the female situation, and a lot of the women that I knew would try to maybe lock down someone through being kind of openly sexual and offering all sorts of sexual not favors, but just trying to impress a guy with sexual prowess and things like that. And these turned into kind of these friends with benefits situations, and they would kind of be waiting around, and the guys would definitely see them and kind of keep them in some form of rotation, but it would not turn into a relationship. And then then they would, after a few months, they would kind of reach some sort of ultimatum stage with these guys and say, oh, if this is not going anywhere, I'm just gonna stop it. And then the guys were like, oh, okay, whatever. And this happened like once or twice and three times. And these were not like, ugly women or things like that, but it just seemed like that was the equilibrium in the whatever dating space that they were in at the time, because there were people who had, had been maybe monogamous, had long relationships, and then a lot of them were foreign and they moved to a different country and they were like, okay, now I'm, looking for a boyfriend. And they kept getting into the same situation. And then at one point it really kind of takes its toll on you mentally. And then you're like, okay, I'm just that woman, I'm just going to be used. And then, it's very hard to I don't know, maintain your value of yourself and in relation to other people when you're like that. And it's also like people, oh, they were definitely dating Chad. No, they weren't. I mean, not anyway. I think they were just dating people who had different intentions. They couldn't date other people. I don't exactly know, but I mean, I've met some of these guys, and it's they were definitely a looks match. I know, I'm quite autistic myself. I know how to rate people. So yeah, it's not that. So I don't know exactly. It just seemed to be that, you either paired off early or you were stuck in this grinding limbo.
Exactly. And yeah, and you've mentioned many things there, all true. So one, like you said, if you don't pair off early, it gets more difficult, right? And what I've said in the past, I call them, the good relationship havers, right? The people that are the good relationship havers, the people that are able to form kind of early, long-term relationships, they don't break up as easily. They get taken out of the mating pool, and if you get to 30 or 35 or something like that, maybe your mating pool is reduced, not only in size, which of course it is, you know, a great deal, but also maybe in qualities to some extent. Maybe a lot of people are single at that age because they need to be. And certainly, in the manosphere and stuff, they talk about the wall and they act like this is some phenomenon where women are going to lose their value, or even where men are going to suddenly skyrocket in value at that point. But I think a more accurate uh, depiction might be, that the high value, so to speak, people are in relationships at that point. And anyone can break up, and anyone can find themselves single at any moment. So if someone is single, it doesn't mean that they're like low value or whatever. But overall, their whole pool of partners might be a little bit lower than it would have been, 10 years ago, so to speak. And then you also said, yes, you said women, will have sex to secure a partner. Yeah, that's certainly something that is observed in evolutionary psychology, is that when women seek commitment with someone, yeah, they'll have sex earlier in a relationship. Sex can be used as a way for commitment. And I think that's something else people get wrong kind of in our promiscuity narratives and that sort of thing. The idea that women are being, they go like they're riding the CC, right? That they're going through this very, very promiscuous stage. And what is probably more likely is that exactly what you described is that kind of pattern where they're seeing someone that they would like to have a relationship with, and for whatever reason it doesn't work out. Maybe they break up after a few months and they did commit a little bit. Maybe they never get to that stage of commitment. Maybe they're building something, because certainly many people have sex before they have an official or committed relationship. So a lot of people, will have sex after a few dates, very normal. And even the sex will be like, the sex wasn't that good, so I'm no longer interested in that person. And so this isn't individuals necessarily even seeking out promiscuity or seeking out casual sex, but people who might actually be seeking a monogamous relationship. That is their ideal. That's what they want. But then over time, they eventually accumulate more sexual partners because of that.
Yes, and that's the thing, because I, just knowing these women personally, they were definitely not like high in any sort of sociosexuality. I know like two or three women who would be like that type of, cougar style, Sex in the City type person just instinctively, and they exist and they're out there. But most of these women essentially, thought, okay, this is the standard, this is what's expected of me, it also, I think, with app dating, it's a bit, like withholding sex is kind of a weird kooky thing where it's like, okay, what exactly did we, are we doing here? It seems like a strange, non-normative way of going about things. Like you have to have a certain reason not to do it, or you kind of have to put your cards on the table, like, oh, it's not going to happen tonight because I don't know, I'm Jehovah's Witness or something like that, and then you risk scaring off the potential partner because yeah, I mean, it's there's also kind of this kind of sex positive vibe, especially in big cities where it's no big deal, it's no problem. So you do feel like you're okay. I'm strongly deviating from the norm here if I make it to 5 dates with this guy and don't do anything. So yeah, it needs to be explained. And after you go through a heartbreak like this, where you date someone for a few months, they break up with you, date someone for a few weeks, they break up with you, you feel like, okay, my bargaining chips here are very low. You know, these people break up with me for any, I don't want to rock the boat here. So I'll just essentially do whatever, I think is expected of me whenever to just, make sure that this guy thinks that I'm very cool and I'm down with it. So yeah, that kind of felt like the vibe there. And, it was really like soul destroying to witness.
Yeah. Something else you mentioned, yeah, that a lot of those people were their looks matches. And I think that's also much more common than the discourse has, because of course, what is the discourse on dating apps? That, it's the 20% of the chads, the most attractive men, are having sex with all of the women, including the women that are very, very low in attractiveness, which is probably not the case. What seems to be much more the case, as far as people that accumulate a lot of sexual partners and have high sociosexuality, probably they're picking people relatively similar to their own appearance in that case.
Yeah, yeah, I think that seemed to me, the case, especially. I mean, even I mean, especially for people who felt like they didn't have many options, like, these girls that were stuck in these kind of cycles weren't necessarily, gunning for, some whatever actor looking guy. Just, just some, someone who they thought, and obviously after a while they would lower their standards, and they would essentially get in the same situation, which would be quite maddening. But yeah. Anyway, there's lots of more things to chat about. I think, yeah, I think another thing that's a big talking point in these circles is divorce statistics. I think very rarely do you see any sort of commentary on male female relationships that doesn't have at least one or two comments about the terrible and dire situation of divorce statistics, of alimony payments, of essentially the custody courts and things like that. And I feel like that's kind of been for me. I mean, just looking at what you presented there, and it seems pretty serious to me in terms of, yeah, just statistically. It is a little bit far from the official, manosphere narrative. So, I mean, what is actually going on with divorce? 'Cause essentially, what we hear is that, okay, women initiate 80% of divorces, which seems, women are neurotic, they're crazy, they're destroying their own marriages, over some guy leaving his socks in the corner, and it's, yeah, they just go nuclear for no reason. What have you found?
Sure, sure. So I'd love to talk about this because I'm writing an art. I have a very long article right now that I'm still preparing. That's going to probably be the next one on Aporia, and it's all about this, all about this. So yeah, let's talk about first the statistic: 80% of women initiate divorces. 80% is probably really high. From what I have seen, and I'll have all of the data out from a bunch of different studies, probably 70% is a little bit high, but I do think it's the case that women initiate most divorces. One thing, when people talk about these initiation statistics, most of the divorce initiation statistics are based on who reports initiating the divorce. They're based on surveys, and you ask both, some ask a couple that's divorced, some ask men and women individually. It's much more rare that they're actually based on divorce filings. And if you look at divorce filings, it can be pretty mixed because uh, for example, in a lot of Europe, you have a divorce filing that will be filed just as a mutual divorce if both people sign on. You won't know who actually filed it, and filings can be misleading anyway because maybe someone broke up with someone and then the other person filed the divorce. So anyway, that's one thing I think people kind of get wrong, but it's not a super important point anyway. So a lot of these divorce statistics ask the man and the woman who had the idea to break up, who broke up with who first, that kind of a question. So typically, women report being the one who broke up more than the man reports being the one who broke up. But there is a difference. Women, it doesn't come out to 100%, basically. Men will say they broke up more than women will say the man broke up. So there's probably some ego preservation there in that case, where whoever is actually the one that got broken up with, some percentage of those individuals will say, no, no, I'm the one that initiated it. So there's kind of a discrepancy. And in some of the papers on this, you actually see that both of them report being the majority. That a majority of men, I should say, a majority of men say that they broke up, initiated it. A majority of women do. These are certainly statistics out there that people don't talk a lot about. I've looked into kind of where the 70% figure comes from, and if you look at all of a lot of its websites from divorce attorneys. They all point back to one large study, and in this study, they found that divorce rates, actually, funny enough, were pretty equal. But then you had a percentage of individuals that reported um, mutual breakup, and they said, okay, we're going to split that in half. So there's a lot of strange things in the methodology about divorce statistics. I do think the general picture overall is that women do initiate most divorces. I think 80% is high, 60% is not. But just knowing that, knowing who initiates most divorces is not as informative as people think that it is. This is one of those really vague, broad, macro level stats that people see that and then they attribute whatever they want to that. Why? Why do they initiate most divorces? Hypergamy, because they're depressed or because they're taking SSRIs or whatever the case may be. But there's, of course, a lot of research that asks couples, like, why did you break up? And among the top reasons, well, first, I should say, when you ask couples that have divorced why, overwhelmingly, they agree on why. Additionally, if you ask couples that have divorced, could you save the marriage? Did you want the divorce? Most of the time, both men and women, a majority report, no, we couldn't have saved the marriage, and no, I probably wouldn't want to. So there's agreement on divorce, regardless of who initiated, regardless of whose idea. I think a lot of men get the impression from these statistics that it's like 70% of women initiated the divorce and 70% of men didn't want a divorce at all, but that's not the case. Usually they agree on the reasons for divorce, and one of the top reasons is simply growing apart. So there are sex differences in reasons for divorce, but the top reasons are kind of mundane. And so that's interesting about divorce as well, because those are things like, well, you grew apart, maybe you could have fixed that. But at the same time, there are sex differences in divorce that could explain probably the entirety of the discrepancy in divorce. One of those is that men cheat more. Again, one of the very well replicated findings in evolutionary psychology. Men are more open to casual sex. Men cheat more. Men are higher sociosexuality. All of those things that kind of go together. Another one is domestic violence. Women report domestic violence more as being a reason for divorce than men do. And these are about 10 to 20% of divorce statistics. So they're not a lot, but they are enough where they could explain the sex differences. And why do 30% more women report a divorce or initiating a divorce than men, or 20%? Those are all things to consider in that case, is that there are differences in the reasons for divorce that differ by sex that could explain that. As far as the abuse statistics, there's recent research also that indicates, okay, a lot of domestic violence seems to be in couples where they both report it going back and forth. But at the same time, women report that being a reason more. Probably men, if they are on the reciprocal end of violence, maybe they view it as less severe. They're less likely to go to the police, less likely to initiate a divorce. And then we get into a bunch of personality differences as well. Women lose satisfaction in relationships earlier than men, more than men. When you track relationship satisfaction of couples over time, at about the 5 year point for married couples, you see relationship satisfaction for women start to drop off more than it does for men. It decreases a little bit for both, but more for women. So even within relationships that aren't divorced, you see that decline in relationship satisfaction. There are different personality traits, sex differences in personality that will probably lead to factors for divorce. One of the big five traits for women, they score a little bit higher in neuroticism, which is associated with divorce. Men score a little bit higher in some antisocial personality traits that are associated with divorce. So you have a lot of things that contribute to divorce. It's not just something random, which I think is really what is missed in that whole, like, who initiates the divorce? It's almost the least important question. The most important question is, like, why? Who are the people initiating the divorces and why?
Yeah, I think people kind of glom onto the statistic because the prevalence of divorce just has grown compared to previous generations, where for some reason people managed to make it work. But it does seem like, okay, this is essentially a change in the narrative of what is possible for the individual. But this is driven by culture, and it's not just the girl boss idea. I mean, you have similar cultural narratives for men as well. I mean, this is not just, men going their own way. That's kind of an extreme, but the idea that you are the creator of your own life. You're not necessarily beholden to um, larger cultural frameworks. You're not beholden to extended family as much as you were before. It's not as stigmatized to divorce. It's seen as absolutely fine. And yeah, it's just it's kind of the pressure on to for people to keep marriages together, even if they were imperfect. has been lifted for both sexes. And yeah, I mean, I just feel like people interpret this as saying, okay, now women are just, they're going buck wild with all this new freedom. But it's just thinking in my family history. I mean, I'm the child of a second marriage, and um, you know, my dad's ex-wife initiated the divorce, but for good reason because my mom already was expecting me. So, there are all sorts of ways of organizing things like this, and yeah, it's you know there are many pitfalls in the world of marriage and dating and things like that, which now I think people just deal with in a much more direct way, which has consequences on society, absolutely, and I think people should weigh these. But when it comes to the individual level, the individual relationship, it does feel to me like, okay, people actually do have issues that they're working through in these divorces.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing that people just leave out of the whole divorce discussions. People have reasons for divorces. Often they're very good reasons. Some of those people probably should not stay together. Some of those marriages probably could be saved. But a lot of, divorce is not a trivial thing. Most people don't divorce for trivial reasons. And most people don't seem to regret that they divorced once the whole thing is over either. So it's kind of like, does it matter? Something you said. So certainly divorce, if you compare it, to 100 years ago, to 60 years ago, it has increased. If you look at the last 10 years or so, it's actually down a little bit, which is probably explained by fewer people getting married. So that's also part of the picture. We see very recent divorce rates, and it's like, oh, divorce is down, but also fewer people are getting married. So maybe people that would have divorced are now just completely abstaining from marriage as well, which is another issue entirely. Is lower rates of marriage, and marriage is not staying together as long. Women having fewer children is something people are concerned about to some extent as well.
Yeah, and I think in this conversation, another data point that always pops up is the prevalence and size of alimony payments, and the fact that divorce is essentially a racket where women are incentivized to divorce men because it's profitable, and there's money in it. You'll get the house, you'll get the children, things like that. I mean, this was also kind of surprising to me because I partially I bought the whole thing in the sense that, okay, yeah, the state is incentivized to probably give the custodial parent much more money, and I never really looked in exactly what the proportions are. But actually, if you look at, if you go to the bean counting level, it doesn't really knock your socks off. Not saying that it doesn't happen that people get financially destroyed by divorce, and I think that happens. But I also think it happens on both ends because the divorces are expensive, and they split assets. You literally have to sell everything to actually split something. So yeah, I mean, it's not a profitable endeavor in general.
Yeah, exactly correct. So Fred and I made a long thread about that, looking at the national statistics from the United States on alimony payments and child support payments. Yeah, but exactly, divorce is not profitable for anyone. Most people take a huge financial hit when they divorce, both sides of it. Women usually enter a period, of poverty. Why I say usually, as I don't know if a majority of women who divorce enter poverty, but women are much more likely to drop below the poverty line for about 3 to 4 years following a divorce, probably before they are able to enter the workforce. Like you said, if you get, you have, it's not like, oh, she gets a house, like there's a bunch of houses to distribute. There might be a house that they have to sell, and they have to move into an apartment and all of that. So, and on top of that, about half of Americans, it's because that's the statistics I'm most familiar with, have no money. And well, I'm pretty familiar with some divorce statistics in Europe. And if you look at who has money here, oof, even less. People, there's no money to split. So, you can't get water out of a stone. Half of zero is zero. And that is what most people in divorces end up getting. Divorce also, it's associated with poverty. So it's not the wealthiest individuals that are most likely to get divorced. It's associated with having lower education. So it's not, career women or university professors that are getting divorced. It's individuals that are, already low income. They're not making a lot of money. They don't have a lot of savings and that sort of thing. And then, of course, that, turns into, okay, well, what kind of alimony are they going to get? Alimony isn't given out that much anymore. About 10%, perhaps lower, of divorces receive any alimony at all. And the average alimony, if I remember correctly, it was between $4,000 to $9,000 a year. It might have been four, and nine might have been Nine might have been average, while four may have been the median. I think that's correct. Yeah, that 4,000 would be the median. So this isn't enough alimony to live on. Child support payments, about half of women don't ever get paid even the full amount of child support that they are ordered by the judge. And the average monthly child support, I believe, was something like $200 or $300. So women with children are not really getting enough child support to take care of the child. Fathers that are forced to pay child support are usually not paying the full amount. Alimony is not taking care of any women unless, except in these cases that we hear about in the media, of course, where it's like someone famous and rich, where they're paying out a fortune, and you think, oh, how is that fair? And people, see that and they think, how is that fair? And then they don't realize, that's probably not going to apply to you if you got divorced. Individual, that has nothing, they're not going to take anything from you because there's nothing to take.
Yes, I think people, put themselves in Jeff Bezos' shoes too often, unfortunately, on the internet. Yeah. Most people aren't in that situation. I think. Have you also looked at kind of custody arrangements? Because another argument here is that yes, of course, they get alimony because the man has to pay because the woman gets sole custody. I mean, what is the percentage, like what's the proportion there? I think, if we are people who believe in sex differences, and that especially with small children, women are more inclined to take on the primary caregiver role. It doesn't surprise me that much that primary custody would be awarded to women more regularly than to men, but there's also quite a lot of cases and, anecdotal stuff that comes up, and they seem quite like vicious situations where, maybe an abusive mother is given the children and the father has no, the custody court is just treating him as a, second class citizen. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you looked into this, but this is also kind of a major point in that narrative.
I've looked into this a little bit. I don't know the exact statistics for custody. One thing is that women seek custody more. Uh, we see that women receive custody more. That might be explained. I don't know the full extent that the variance is explained solely by seeking custody more. But when men and women fight for custody, then men are more likely to, of course, receive custody in that case. Certainly, like you said, sex differences emerge. Would we expect men to seek custody of the children just, kind of a priori if you were thinking about the different sex differences in nurturing and child rearing? Probably not. And I think that is probably reflected in women seeking custody more. Another thing, actually, kind of related to that, as far as divorce statistics, when I was looking into all of the research on divorce, something else that emerged is men leave the household before a divorce first. So when a couple is about to break up, kind of regardless of who initiated or whatever, men leave the house more. About 60% of men will leave, about 40% of women will leave. So if you're a man, and you have kids and you leave the house, those are all things that are going to play into a custody battle if it emerges. And then I don't know the statistics, how accurate they are for this, but I had a professor who was a forensic psychologist in courts, and he worked in a divorce court. What he told me was, okay, so the people that come as far as contentious divorces that are battling over money, custody, and they're actually going to court and have to have a trial. This isn't most people that divorce. Most people work it out for whatever the arrangement is. They don't go through a lengthy court battle. But of those that do, he said, a lot of these individuals have personality disorders, cluster B personality disorders, either one or both of them. And both of them is very, very common as well. And so you have, cluster B personality disorders, antisocial personality disorder, narcissism. These are not people that particularly care about who actually wins or who actually gets to spend time with the kids or whatever. They want to beat the opponent. That's what's really, really important for them, particularly narcissists, is winning. So you have like these custody battles, and that's something you have to consider already. Is most couples are able to work out visitation following a divorce, custody, and can I see the kids without that kind of intervention at all. It's you don't have to if you get a divorce, you don't have to seek special permission to see the kids. That sort of thing comes into play when one person or both are trying to fight to keep the other person from it. And so already you're seeing like, this is a contentious divorce. These people have some issues above and beyond most people who go through a divorce.
Yeah, and I think if you look at distribution of different cluster B personality disorders, I think they're overall pretty evenly distributed, but I think men tend to fall more into the narcissistic end, and women tend to fall more into the bipolar end.
Mhm.
But they do find each other in the wild, unfortunately. Yeah, like you said, this isn't a rare coupling. Yeah, and it is hellish for the children involved. Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's another thing that you mentioned in your research. It's there's another famous graph, obviously, the sexual market value peaks graph, where women peak at 23, and I think I don't know, this that's the norming on the graph is not that evident, but it's also very common to to show up in the comments. And I think men are supposed to peak at 38, which obviously is a huge discrepancy and is fuels a lot of commentary. I mean, I wonder what your take is on this discrepancy.
Sure. So, yeah, that's a graph that's floating around right now on Twitter, isn't it? I've seen some retweets just
Mhm.
yesterday and everything. So, this is a graph. It's not based on any data. It's just something that was invented. So, there's no underlying data to, that they said, like, this is how we define nothing like that. It's just something that someone made up. Do I think is it real? Is that probably not? Is the sexual market value at 38 for men? I mean, have you seen most men who are 38 years old? Very few men remain attractive at 38 years old. And kind of like we discussed previously, a lot of those men that are, that if it's attractive physically or because they're a good relationship haver or whatever, they have money, they're going to have a girlfriend already, right? Probably someone that's kind of close to their age. They're typically not single men, pursuing very young women, in their sexual market value that's supposedly at 21. Certainly, what do women prefer as far as what women seek? If male sexual market value was at 38, I think that is something we would see reflected in dating app statistics, because one of the metrics that I have seen, that you can look at is kind of like, what is the age range that women set? Because you can filter out ages on Tinder and Bumble and that sort of thing. Women pick ages that are pretty close to their own age. They're typically not setting that slider to see a man who is 20 years older than them. They're trying to filter out even seeing those profiles to begin with, which I think says a lot about the age that women are seeking. I've done some research recently that I have on the website, where I asked, what is your preferred age as well? Men, they prefer women who are younger on average, about 5 years. But also, the women get younger as the men get older, whereas women, it's about 2 years on average, and that stays very, very close to the woman's old age. There's a correlation of 0.9, is an amazingly close correlation. You don't see correlations that tight in psychology often. And women pick men, they say they prefer at least men who are their own age. And certainly when we look at marriage rates as well, what is the average age gap in a marriage? It's about 2 years. And if you look at large age gaps over about 10 years, that's between like 5 and 2% of all marriages. So actual mate selection, revealed behavior, we don't see it. The Tinder, I guess, age, I guess that's an actual behavior. And then self-report as well, we don't see it. So is there any reason to think, that women at their peak would prefer, at supposedly 21, right? Would prefer men who are 38? I don't think so. I imagine whoever made that chart maybe was that age, and so this is it. This is the peak for men. It's my age. It's the age that I am right now.
Yeah, I could imagine that the age difference would increase with second marriages, just because of the kind of the pattern of older men. Some older men, not all older men, unfortunately, for the older men, can find maybe a younger wife. They tend to get a younger wife if they can. But yeah, I think overall it's probably not as common as people think.
Yeah, yeah, I don't imagine. And I think you're right. And I don't know about recent data on that, but I did look into historical data on the European marriage pattern, which was average age for marriage across Europe, for the last between 700-800 years or so. And that was something that did emerge in that data, was that first marriages were, for one, they were older than people think. People seem to think like 200 years ago, everyone was getting married at like age 15. Not the case. Pretty consistently for European history, for at least the last 800 years or so, the average age of marriage was between like 20 and 25 for both men and women. And men were not that much older on average. But if you look at second marriages, then you see a different picture. And that is when you do kind of see like, older man who's usually a widower in that case marrying a younger woman, and sometimes the opposite as well, because uh, people, may have died in that case, and so they're a widower. That seems to be what a lot of them were, because as opposed to seeing like divorces, if you look at historical data, that's kind of what you see, like a lot of widowers, like, oh, so and so was a widower and they took someone. Yeah, but yeah, the second marriage, that I think you probably will see a larger age gap.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And another thing that does pop up quite a lot is the concept of hybristophilia. You know, the fact that women will be attracted to men with kind of extreme or criminal tendencies. You know, the whole story about women, writing to serial killers and things like that, which does happen and is quite an interesting phenomenon, I would say, and definitely kind of begs for an explanation. But I mean, what do you know about this phenomenon in the sense of, how prevalent is it? Is it, essentially a female fetish, or is it, a tendency that's kind of at the core of female nature?
Well, so research on hybristophilia, and I think there's even some debate if that's even real, what it's described. Certainly, what we observe, the phenomenon where people fall in love with serial killers and become like crazy serial killers, that's obviously real. If this is like a construct that we should call like hybristophilia, like attraction to that, is kind of debated. But I did find a really good recent paper. I had posted that up as well, that looked at posts on Tumblr from communities of women that were herbistophiles, right? And they looked at what kind of things they focused on. And they found, okay, about half of these women don't even seem to care that much about the individual. They're not focusing that much on the individual. They don't think he's like super attractive. They compared this to fans of normal stars, like a K-pop star and some other, I guess, a boy band star or something like that. They said, okay, you look at these guys, they post a lot of photos of the guys. They're focused on like sexual attraction to those men that they're fans of. Some of the hybristophiles seem to, about half seem to fall into that category where it's like, okay, they're in love with the killer or whatever. Another half seem to really just be attracted to the violence, where it's like, okay, they really like these violent acts. And are there men who are similar in that sense, who are obsessed with like shooters and violence and killers? Of course there are. And so are women and men really different in that condition, where there are men and women who are obsessed with like shooters and violent acts and essentially killer celebrities in that sense? No, there's men and women that are fans of both, but do men find female serial killers sexually attractive and pursue them? I think probably less than women. The little bit of research that is on this kind of attraction, indicates that it's much, much more common in women. Is it exclusive to women? No, but it's certainly more common in women. And there's of course something related, which is kind of like attraction to bad boys. And I think these are actually two different phenomenon: the attraction to a bad boy, and then the attraction to someone that is essentially a psychopathic murderer. People, I think they think this is kind of like a difference in degree, a grade of the same thing. Like James Dean on the motorcycle and like Ted Bundy. These are very, very different things. They're very different, and the psychology behind them, I think, is very different. I can only speculate to some extent here because there's not a lot of research. It's not well understood at all. But
Yeah, I think it's a strange phenomenon that's also maybe tied into because there's definitely a lot of popularity for true crime and things like that, and it does skew quite female. A lot of some of the biggest podcasts in the world are just two women chatting about recounting the misdeeds of the Night Stalker or something like that. It's kind of strange, but I do think it's also kind of the fact that with modernity relieving us of a lot of the need to kind of have gendered behavior, which was essentially necessary in our evolutionary past, because a lot of the so-called gender roles were literally what you had to do to survive in terms of procreation, in terms of just maintaining a household, fighting off invaders and wild animals and things like that. It's just that's the way it used to be. Now we can essentially relax into kind of this androgynous mush, and I feel like maybe a lot of women kind of have this instinct in the back of their mind for that polarity. And the only place where that polarity, I mean, not the only place, but one place where that kind of instinctive male violence that's kind of been snuffed out by the state and the market still exists is in these weird stories about these freaky people who just go out and kill everyone, and you kind of want to know, like, what's wrong with him, or what's right with him. It's fascinating, but I think a lot of women don't really, go into detail about. I don't think it's necessarily like a I don't like. I really don't think a lot of women, are kept up at night thinking about Ted Bundy in a sexual way. But that, that instinct of, this is something relevant to me, and I need to know about this. It feels like more. I don't know. Maybe it's a bit more fuzzy than a straight up, this is super hot type situation.
Yeah. Something that's interesting as well is if I think this is a very interesting avenue of research, is looking into female erotica, romance novels written for women, because the authors are typically women. They select all of the themes, and so are all of the readers, or at least a majority of the readers. And there's been a little bit of research on this, on themes that emerge. And one of the themes across romance novels is the bad boy, right? So you have, werewolf, pirate, you have criminal is a big one. They have like mafia members and stuff like that. I haven't seen like serial killer emerge as a very big one. That seems to be pretty extreme. And certainly one of the observations in evolutionary psychology as far as aggression and violence is that it's kind of a trade-off. It's a dual-edged sword in a sense, because on the one hand, a man who is capable of physical aggression, who is strong enough to defeat other men, who is willing to, who has that motivation and that temperament, can protect a woman. On the other hand, he also poses a threat to her and to her offspring. So whatever traits have to be combined with that kind of have to balance that out. So there's certainly reasons to think like, okay, I can see why some of these, bad boy leaning traits would be attractive, but also not, why they might not be attractive at the most extreme. And certainly the most desirable men are not serial killers, right? This is a phenomenon that we observe in a very fringe, in a minority of women, which should say something as well, which is basically like most women don't find them sexually attractive. Most women might find, someone who's kind of edgy or kind of a bad boy attractive, if it's reined in correctly, but like full blown serial killer, very few women.
Yeah, I think that's reflected in the kind of study you did, or I don't know, you revealed about how women interpret the attractiveness of the Giga Chad, which is, if anyone doesn't know what the Giga Chad is, it's a meme of an actual person, which was very surprising to me because I thought this person was rendered digitally because that's what he looks like. Who is essentially, if you had one of those face tuning apps, you would just set masculinity up to the max, and he's chiseled jaw, broad shouldered, perfect physique. He's got all the things that you're supposed to have if you're going to be like extra super mega masculine. And apparently, women are not that into him. How come?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. So, yeah. So men and women rated the Giga Chad's face, and a majority of men found him attractive. A majority of women didn't. Very few individuals said he was average. You had a minority of women that said, "Yeah, he's attractive," and a minority of men that said not. Certainly, it kind of makes sense. No one, very few people rated him as average because it's not a very average face at all. So this is one difference in, I think this actually even ties into kind of what we were talking about on Tinder and dating apps, is that men often project what they find attractive or what is relevant to them as men onto women. So men see someone like the Giga Chad, who's like, if you see his body, he's a real person. I thought he was rendered as well, but no, he's a real person, extremely, tall, facially dimorphic. He's a jacked bodybuilder as well. And men see that. It's like seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you say, you think, I want to be that. I want to be that. But that doesn't mean that that's what women see as attractive. And certainly research on faces, which I also cover in a great deal in that article, indicate, okay, the most attractive faces to women are not the most dimorphic faces. They're not the most feminine nor the most masculine faces. They're kind of in the middle. They might lean a little bit more masculine than a little bit feminine, but you can take the most masculine face. It's usually not going to get rated the highest. And this is true if you use natural faces, like the Giga Chad. You find faces of real people that are dimorphic. If you use a computer to manipulate the same faces to make them more dimorphic or whatever, it seems pretty consistent. So yeah, women want someone who is, and I think you see this kind of in the men that are selected as models as well. Very often, they do have a facial dimorphism, you can see it in the defined cheekbones. They often have a visible jawline, but they don't have a huge head. They're not built like a linebacker, so to speak. They have a mixture of masculine and feminine features, which seems to be something that is revealed as attractive as well, both for men and women, to some extent, particularly in the eyes, kind of neonatalist features, right? Neoteny, kind of a feminized, or I should say, a youthful, a juvenile feature combined with some masculine features.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I fall into the normal category here as well. I mean, I feel like the Giga Chad looks like handsome Squidward. He's not not of this world. Yeah, and I think it's there's something quite directly threatening about someone who's just like I don't know, just emanates I don't know, a threat to other men, I guess, because that's why my men think he's attractive. But yeah, it's a strange category. Um, there's another thing I want to talk to you about the dual mating hypothesis. About this is another kind of core tenet of kind of manosphere discourse that women will kind of maximize for reliable long term providers on the one hand, but on the other hand, they actually want to have children with people who have so called good genes and would be, essentially, maybe, milk, redheaded children from the milkman and things like that, which, obviously is lore for a reason. So I wonder what you make of the dual mating hypothesis.
Sure. So this was a dominant strain of thought in evolutionary psychology until somewhat recently. This, to paraphrase David Buss in a recent paper, he said that short-term mating strategies perhaps only apply to a small percentage of women, a minority of women, which is a shift away. Evolutionary psychology has kind of shifted away from the dual mating hypothesis. Well, let me start beginning. Let me explain what this is, perhaps is better. So the dual mate hypothesis is the idea, well, as you explained it, that women select a man who is a provider for a long-term relationship, and then a man for good genes, which typically mean cues of health, which are often related to physical attractiveness, for a short-term provider. And that means, okay, so the woman is going to have a provider that can raise her, protect her, give her resources, take care of her offspring, but her offspring will actually be related to the Giga Chad, right? It's actually going to be the Giga Chad's baby. So why has evolutionary psychology shifted so far away from this? Now, different reasons. The dual mate hypothesis was, of course, tied up with ovulatory shift. It was called the dual mate hypothesis of ovulatory shifts. And that's because women have a concealed ovulation. Women can't get pregnant all month around. Women can only get pregnant, during that fertile window, I think. So this means that women should show a stronger preference, a stronger expression of for men that have those good genes traits. Okay, so we see that a lot of this research doesn't actually replicate. Women seem to want the same traits, and they are signs of good genes. They're like physical attractiveness, highly desired. Okay, height, all of these things that we're associated with, the alpha with the supposed short-term partner are things that it turns out women desire in their long-term partners just as much. So kind of moving away from that toward a new hypothesis they call the mate switching hypothesis, which is actually that infidelity, when it occurs, is not seeking necessarily the good genes of another man to stay in the relationship, but rather it's an attempt to switch to another relationship. This kind of related to what you said before, is that women will use sex to enter a relationship. So infidelity for a lot of women might be used to enter a new relationship, not necessarily to secure the good genes. Another thing that I think has undermined the dual mate hypothesis to a great extent are rates of extra pair parentage, which is basically, how many men are actually raising the offspring of another man. This can be looked at I guess, in genetics to some extent, in our genetic history. If you don't go back too quickly, it can be looked at as well in recent genetics. And the rates seem really, really small. They seem, between 1% to 5%, depending on the country. So we don't see rates of extra pair parenting that actually conform to the dual mate hypothesis, right? Because if this is a strategy that most women express, we should see a lot of people raising the children, of other men. And people say that might not be the case recently because of birth control. No, but we would see that in the recent history, which we kind of don't see. So all of these things have kind of shifted away from the dual mate hypothesis. But like you said, this has become kind of a feature, a cornerstone of manosphere ideology. Why? Because it turned into the alphas and the betas, which are this kind of meta idea to describe all human behavior. Every man is an alpha or a beta.
Yeah, and it kind of fuels this. I think this is, a normal insecurity about just paternity certainty that's probably, a very deep, um, I don't know, sensitive area for men. The idea that, if you have kind of a liberalized marketplace of people, having intercourse, very rarely are people virgins when they get married. And the idea that, one of the men that your wife was whatever having intercourse with at one point, is this Chad figure, and this comparison, this tension between, okay, what's my mate value, what does she see in him, and things like that. I think this is psychologically something that is not easy to negotiate, I think. And I feel like if you have a lot of ideology, lore, and things like that that comes in to actually explain concepts like alpha widows and things like that, it really feeds into this pre-existing uncertainty and yeah, just anxiety, which I think evolutionary makes a lot of sense, but it's also something like it's a really good substrate for these ideas to catch on.
Yeah, definitely. And I imagine something like that, like sensitivity toward infidelity or toward uncertain parentage is probably a personality variable that has some degree of individual differences. So some people are going to be much more sensitive to that than others. And like you said, the idea of being alpha widowed, some people are, this doesn't even need like an evolutionary explanation. Some people are just going to be much, much more insecure about that. If they see someone's ex and they think, oh, that was an attractive person who might be more attractive than me, they might never get over that. So yeah, those are all things. And yeah, and in a modern environment, like you said, this is something that might not have occurred if people were getting married at 18 as virgins, relationship stresses that might never have emerged in a modern environment, where your partner has had many other partners or something like that. That could cause a lot of problems. Something else kind of related to that that's interesting is a surprisingly large number of men actually have fantasies about cuckoldry, and I wonder to what extent that kind of plays into all of the discourse on that, because some of it seems to be, as far as those men go, some of that seems to be related to anger and humiliation. And for some men, it doesn't at all. There's even a difference within men that have that fantasy. And sometimes, I wonder in all of that discourse, like, I wonder if some of this anger and stuff is actually kind of an expression of a fantasy from those individuals as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely something that keeps appearing in conversations about this. There's always kind of an interracial angle as well, which I think I looked this up. I mean, the data doesn't really pan out for this, and I think that interracial sex is fairly rare in reality. I mean, just comparatively, especially for white women, which tends to be the group that people address these accusations to. And but it is very common in pornography. So I think maybe yeah, there's just I feel like something there that people maybe are not necessarily taking from the facts on the ground, but from the facts in their browser.
Yeah, that's kind of a very Freudian thing, also, kind of like, you hate this because you have a fantasy for it deep down. Yeah. But it could be for some people, there are cognitive relationships for some individuals between humiliation, between anger, and between sexual pleasure and stimulation. So certainly some of those individuals, yeah, might be kind of expressing uh, that anger is part of a fantasy that they have. But I wouldn't say that about all of them. Certainly, it's not one of those things that you would want to reduce and be like, you only care because you want to have that fantasy or something. But it could be a part of the picture.
Yeah, I think once something becomes part of the discourse, I think a lot of people take it as fact, and a lot of maybe people think it's interesting for other reasons. Yeah, there's many reasons why people might be interested or convinced by a subculture. So yeah, definitely, it's not homogenous at all. But I wonder, just looking into a lot of these black pilling facts, and I do think the manosphere had quite a lot of value in the sense that people didn't really think about sexual dimorphism, the differences between the sexes and things like that. There's kind of this like strange sexual egalitarianism in the 90s. And I think what the Manosphere did is essentially just bring a lot of this stuff to the surface. And I think a lot of it is true in the sense that, the species is sexually dimorphic and it really benefits. And I've said this on this podcast, well, it really benefits me as someone who's in a marriage to know what the differences between the sexes are and to be able to negotiate just the division of labor, to relax about certain things, to make my peace with certain things, which will probably not change because my husband is a man and I maybe expect things of him that just don't are not manly. So yeah, it's been really beneficial to me. I think people should know about this stuff, but at the same time, it, the incentives on the internet and a lot of what I call these rage anecdotes. Like if you are in these spaces, I mean, obviously, the purpose of the pages that I don't know MGTOW X or something like that is to create engagement, and they serve you little snippets, videos from podcasts with women who are like 18 and have OnlyFans, and they say retarded stuff, and then you're like, yeah, women are absolutely retarded, and you see like 20 of those a day, and it really leaves a mark on you. And I'm a little bit worried because I'm gonna have my second son now in August, and just imagining him, stumbling across these spheres and just like being like 15 and worried about getting divorce raped, and it's really bleak. And I feel like, and I'm not saying that not everyone in those spheres has a point, and I know there are people with bleak dating prospects out there, I know, but the idea that you just kind of plug your brain into something like this and it's really bleak pretty much, and I know that the facts on the ground aren't always like that. So that's kind of what I appreciate about your work, that you're kind of you're trying to have a more balanced approach to this, even if I know a lot of people don't like to have a balanced approach about anything on the internet. But yeah, I mean, I guess my question is that do you have any things that you've seen? Okay, this is robust. These are claims that these groups are making. That yeah, this is true, and it is dark and black pilling, but the data and what we see with our eyes outside in nature, it really makes sense.
Sure. So very robust as far as the black pill would be concerned is the effect of looks and attractiveness. They may, to some extent, overestimate the magnitude of the effect, but if they're coming from, I guess, what they call the blue pill, which is kind of like our folk psychology, right? A popular myth that attractiveness doesn't matter. It's all about what you're on the inside, and of course, being on the inside, the most important thing is to be a good boy. They some people believe that growing up. I didn't, I wasn't raised that way. I was told like it's good to be tall and attractive from like this. But some people, I guess, are, that's a belief that they actually have at one point. That's like, no, like your looks literally do not matter. They learn like looks do matter, and it just like rocks their whole world. That's one thing that's very robust, is that physical attractiveness is very, very important. It's probably one of the most important things for initial relationship formation, right? It might not, well, it even predicts things as far as like relationship success over the long term, over relationship happiness, even female orgasm rates. So attractiveness, the way that your face looks is pretty important. Height, being attractive is another thing that's pretty robust. Most of maybe the magnitude of the effects of that also can be overestimated a little bit, but you get all of these things together, even if the effects individually are not huge, and it's like, okay, so attractive, tall, muscular, all of these things about physical appearance that some people have together in a group and other people don't have any of. And it's like, wow, yeah, you can even, see that these people have a huge advantage in the dating market, and these other individuals are really cut out of it. And that's very, very black pilling. Another very black pilling thing for me that I think they don't talk about that much, but certainly some individuals have, like Stardust, for example, a big name in the manosphere, is the role of personality, and the fact that personality is very stable and difficult to change over time, because that's another part of our folk psychology. It's like, just change your personality. Personality is very difficult to change. It's very heritable, personality across the board, about 50% genetic, heritable, and very stable over the lifetime. So someone is introverted, they don't like, going out to parties and stuff like that. That's very difficult to change. They're probably never going to enjoy that like someone who is extroverted. Someone who has other traits, antisocial traits, personality disorders, those don't get cured basically. If you go to therapy for a personality disorder, they'll help you kind of like cope with it. But those, there's not like cures for these things. They stay with people forever. So that's also kind of black pilling. Certain the role of financial success. When we talk about hypergamy, a lot of that, I see people now, they talk about hypergamy a lot as far as looks, which again goes back to the dating app thing. They think, women are only swiping on handsome men. That's hypergamy. Okay. The men do that as well. The preference for physical attractiveness on dating apps is about the same for men and women. Swipe, as far as a showing a preference, if you look at like who prefers what profile. But most of the research on hypergamy has looked at education and income. So women prefer men who are slightly more educated on average. Women prefer men who have more money on average. Not everyone is going to get rich. Not everyone's going to make a lot of money to be like Leonardo DiCaprio, where, they can buy a girlfriend who's 19 or whatever. So that's also very robust and to some extent, consistent with what the red pill says, not the black pill as much, but certainly the red pill has always focused a bit more on the role of status in that case.
Yeah, I think it's very obviously correlated with yeah, just competence. I mean, if you want to take it in a more mild direction, I mean, these status markers are the way you realize if someone could be a good provider for your children. I mean, this is not necessarily new, but yeah, people use all sorts of proxies to estimate someone's yeah, someone's made value, and I think it's just yeah, evolutionarily coherent that women would optimize for this, and I guess men optimize for fertility. If you look at the fact that they do tend to prefer the younger ones, which is probably part of the female black pill. um, yes, I think that's all really really interesting. I know we're coming up on time a little bit, and I want to ask you the last question, which is the question of the show, which is you have a recommendation for a thinker, could be from this field or whoever you found inspirational, that you think is underrated, maybe a subversive thinker.
Hmm. Well, first comes to mind, have you talked to William Costello yet about incels?
No, but I know William Costello. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
I don't know if
absolutely.
he's
Yeah.
underrated because he's very well known, but that's someone that comes to mind. If I can think of an academic as well who does really good research in this field, uh, but who is perhaps a little bit less well known than someone like David Buss. Oh my goodness, I've just forgotten his name. But well, I'm gonna say William. William, you got to have
Yeah.
William on.
Okay. Good. 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 I will. I will. I think the conversation about incels is really interesting. Actually, today I saw in the news on Twitter that the king of the incels has a girlfriend and he's being ostracized by the other incels. I don't know if you've caught this, but yeah,
Yeah,
apparently it's a sin to have sex in these groups. So yeah, it's an interesting situation. I wonder if he'll renounce his ideology now that his situation has changed. But I think someone was remarking that women love status independent of whatever hierarchy you happen to have it in. I think they mentioned that his girlfriend knows that he's the king of the incels or whatever, master admin and the incel forum. And yeah, if this isn't a white pill, I don't know what is, my friends.
yeah, yeah. That's. I think this is the act of sex that will be talked about the most in 2023. The celebrity sex that people are most interested in is the incel forum leader who got a girlfriend.
Yeah, definitely in my corner of the internet, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much, Alexander. This has been lovely. Yeah, I hope people walk away from this slightly sobered a little bit about the facts on the ground. Maybe more informed or whatever. And I wish you a lot of productivity and writing more and doing more research in this field. And I also want people to check out datepsychology.com, where you do quite a lot of these literature reviews and look into these questions. And your Twitter profile as well, at Datepsych. And is there anything else that you want people to check out?
No, that's all. Thank you very much for having me on. Very good chat. Had a lot of fun.
Excellent.